the real coming of age story that Goethe told about how do you come to grips with a world that doesn't even acknowledge your inner life or your desire for the transcendent. That's the real question.
That's so relevant now because I feel like the coming of age from 10 years to 10 years now is rapidly accelerating. Social media, digital media, AI and all that.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah. It's
just from my age, I'm in my 40s
hmm
to a 20-year-old right now. My son's 18.
hmm
Our worlds are completely different
yeah.
in how they're paced and how people relate. So to write something now, or just not even just for literature, but just for the sake of understanding your culture now with 10-year iterations is insane compared to their generations was, probably things were changing a lot over 50 years.
That's right.
And now
Yeah,
things are changing a lot over 2 to 5 years.
yeah. That's right.
I don't know what to do with that.
Well,
Or how Goethe speaks into that.
the good news is the inner life and is not isn't really changed.
That's
There's
that's that's
still
that's
there
the thing.
yeah, there's still the desire for meaning, love, connection, community, God. All those transcendent desires are as fresh with every generation.
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
It's great entertainment, thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Today we're diving into Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And as a disclaimer, right from the outset, I do not know German. I do not know how to pronounce German. So bear with me on a few words here. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was born in 1749 and died in 1832. He was a German polymath, a poet, playwright, novelist, scientist, and statesman, whose influence on Western thought and literature is profound. Born in Frankfurt, Germany, he displayed early brilliance in literature and the natural sciences, later becoming a central figure in the German Sturm und Drang, which I do not know how to pronounce, storm and stress movement, which rebelled against Enlightenment rationalism in favor of intense emotion and individuality. His book, The Sorrows of Young Werther, 1774, made him an international literary sensation, while his magnum opus, Faust, remains one of the most celebrated works in world literature. Goethe's intellectual pursuits extended beyond literature. He engaged deeply with philosophy, optics, and natural sciences, often challenging prevailing scientific and theological assumptions. His concept of world literature anticipated globalization's cultural exchange, and his holistic approach to knowledge placed him at odds with rigid Enlightenment empiricism and later romantic escapism. In his book, Subversive Orthodoxy, Professor Inchasti positions Goethe alongside figures like William Blake, both of whom challenged the forces of religious dogmatism and secular materialism. Like Blake, Goethe resisted a world reduced to mechanistic rationality while also critiquing the rigid moralism of institutional religion. Instead, he sought a poetic and philosophical vision that embraced paradox, integrating the sciences with the mystical, the rational with the mythic. His book Faust, for instance, critiques both modern hubris and medieval superstition, ultimately affirming redemption beyond human striving. Nietzsche admired Faust because it dramatized the modern human condition, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, experience, and power, yet the ultimate need for something transcendent. Faust's dissatisfaction mirrors Nietzsche's idea of Übermensch, the Superman, pushing beyond conventional morality and embracing the tragic beauty of existence. However, Goethe's vision diverges from Nietzsche's in that Faust finds grace, suggesting that striving alone is insufficient without divine intervention. Goethe's influence remains embedded in the American worldview, particularly in the cultural ideal of self creation and the pursuit of experience. His Faustian archetype lives on in the Silicon Valley's innovators, political leaders, and artists who chase progress, often at a great personal cost. His belief in world literature echoes in America's global cultural and intellectual exchanges, and his insistence on an integrated vision, one that refuses to separate science from art, reason from faith, continues to challenge both materialist reductionism and rigid fundamentalism. And with no further ado, I'd like to bring on Professor Inchausti.
Hello, Travis. Thank
Hi,
you
Larry.
that's a great introduction. That's well put.
A lot of tough words in there.
Yeah.
One question right off the bat was his concept of world literature. Is that it's kind of predicting globalism?
Yes, it's predicting globalism, but it's also a recognition of the universality of Enlightenment rationality. That literature no longer has to be just merely statements of nationalist values and individual pride, but really a forum for universal human experience.
Sort of a globalist vision of humanity rather than our own tribes.
Yeah, and that the literature of various nations could enter into dialogue over the fundamental experiences of human life.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and he was I don't know whether, I guess he was sort of the first person to sort of celebrate that fact and see himself not just writing, in the German tongue for the German people, but for a world audience, essentially, and that other literatures could be used by readers from all different nationalities to find their sense of universal humanity confirmed. Yeah. I guess that'd be the way to put it.
Yeah. Well, to give our audience a little more context, he's a guy who wrote a book on the science of colors.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book on plants. He wrote, how about The Sorrows of Young Werther? Was that considered a novel? Just prose? Or was
Yes.
it poetry too?
It was a novella, a short novel, and it was it was one of those epistolatory novels that were written in the form of letters.
Tell us what does Goethe mean to you, and how did he fit into the subversive orthodoxy world? And like, how is he, I mean, that question, but also just what does he really mean to you? Or is he just more of he just fits in Western literature canon?
Well, in some ways, helped invent the Western literature canon. He's recognized, as a genius and a world historical figure, but nobody really knows exactly why, other than that he wrote Faust and he had a hit coming out of the box with The Sorrows of Young Werther. But he is credited with um, in not that he invented world literature, although that's part of it. But during this period of time, with the growth of the Enlightenment and the rise of science and rationality, uh, literature had to kind of redefine itself as something other than just stories about rationality. Stories about like Samuel Johnson's Restless. Stoic stories about living a rational, good life. And for Goethe, it was, well, no, the novel is more ambitious than that. It deals with inner experience in an external world that doesn't fit the inner experience. Modernity is a kind of alienation from the old world. And the novels, the very first novel, the celebrated novel, Don Quixote, is a story of a guy who whose values don't fit the new commercial world. He wants to be a knight and be noble. And the new commercial world is sort of based on rationality and emerging capitalism. And so there's this clash between the inner life and the external circumstances. And so, how do you navigate that? Well, you can uh, create a delusional world of your own internal imagination and live like a knight against all of the new values. But there you run the danger of either being thought of as crazy or you just end up being this eccentric that doesn't fit in. Or you could just deny your internal experience and conform to the new economic social order. But then there's this internal alienation where you feel that you're unreal and unexpressed. Or with Goethe, you can write the novel of self-development, what he called the Belta's Belta Roman, the novel of development, where you make a character who's in conflict with his world and try to work out the psychological social realities by articulating his subjective experience.
Is
Now,
that what Faust is?
that's what Faust is, and that's what Goethe is, and that's what his Bildungsroman, uh, Meist, Meister's Apprentice, I think is how it's translated in uh, English, of a guy who's trying to find how he can relate his inner life to to the external modern world, and he decides, kind of like Goethe, to use art and literature and theater as a way of helping mediate the external forces and his internal needs and desires and experience. And so that is the beginning of the modern novel, because most modern novels, or most novels, all novels, are kind of epics of homelessness. They're not the great Greek epics of external triumph. They're stories about people who don't necessarily fit into the status quo and struggle to find their place and their meaning in spite of that. And Goethe's uh, novels of self development, like Sorrows of Young Werther and like Faust, try to describe what are the psychological stages and crises that evolve from that. So, in a world where there wasn't any psychology yet, where there wasn't any therapy, there wasn't any psychotherapy, there was at best, um, spiritual counseling, if you were lucky, or uh, a knowledgeable uncle, like in Sorrows of Young Werther, where his uncle is kind of a career counselor who doesn't really understand the inner life of Werther, merely his external circumstances. And so the novel becomes a way of exploring these psychological dynamics. And for Goethe, Goethe was brilliant enough of a person that impressed Nietzsche with his introspection.
And
Uh,
Napoleon.
yeah, and
I mean,
Napoleon.
that's pretty I
good
mean,
audiences.
yeah, it's
Right?
kind of a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. I don't like
You're
Goethe
you're
because
Nietzsche and Napoleon's favorite writer.
yeah, and so he probes these these psychological and internal crises, like in Werther, where he is, has a sympathy for people who um, love people that don't love them back, or in uh, the Wilhelm Meister's Apprentice, he has a sympathy for artists whose work is not understood, and who are trying to navigate uh, the new world that understands new things about optics, but maybe not so much new things about the inner life, because the inner life doesn't quite fit with the new world of optics as it did before, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
literature and so literature, world literature becomes, as the whole world undergoes these kinds of transitions into the modern. Um, he was fascinated by that, and so he wrote Faust Part I, which is about a midlife crisis in the face of a guy who spent his whole life seeking knowledge and power and coming up with nothing at midlife.
yeah.
And
Before we go
yeah,
into Faust though,
yeah.
um, because I know we're gonna spend some time on Faust for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
But like one thing that I'm learning about Goethe, and you keep mentioning him in this context of literature, but I think what he was trying to do was way beyond literature. He was like trying to speak to his culture.
Yeah,
That as they were becoming, I'm trying to articulate the words, as they were becoming, the the older generation in Werther, being stoic and capitalistic and having all the answers of, the Enlightenment,
yeah,
thinking they can make life mechanistic. It seems that in every way, Goethe held everything together in tension rather than having all the answers. As I look at his whole work, it seems that his genius was, as a polymath, was the ability to hold a bunch of things together. Um, he had a unique concept of evil, that it wasn't static, but it was dynamic, and it was like evolving, and it was bouncing off of the character, like in Faust. We'll get to that.
yeah.
That he was also saying that science and art and mysticism are not separate things; they can all be integrated, which no one from the Enlightenment would have thought that.
Other
um,
than William Blake, maybe, and they thought he was crazy, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
then just bringing in that punk rock reality of like tragedy and death and suicide, and that was something from your book. I want to read this. This is like, if somebody asked me why should you care about Blake, I think that, I mean, not Blake, I'm sorry, Goethe,
Mm-hmm.
that it would be kind of, this is one of the concepts that I think is pretty special about him.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of like the anti-Disney concept.
Mm-hmm.
It says, it's coming off of some of the stuff from Faust, but it says, what is
Yeah.
remarkable here is that Goethe's insight into the spiritual tragedies inherent both to the Romantic movement, represented by Werther, and to the scientific technological wager, represented by Faust. These two sides of the modern psyche, its idealistic youthful longings for total personal fulfillment and its cynical midlife thirst for power, serve as two sides of the same cautionary tale. The sorrows of young Werther warns us not to confuse our desire for reality, however authentic they may feel. Our dreams can never be fulfilled because they are a symptom of a deeper longing, not of this world. That's very anti-Disney right there. I'm going to read it again. Our dr-
Amen.
our dreams can never be fulfilled because they are a symptom of a deeper longing, not of this world. Wow. While Faust warns us that no matter how much power we have, no matter how infinite our resources, God's providence remains a mystery to our natural selves. These essentially religious ideas are more than moral. They are ontological assertions and existential assumptions born of a religious worldview that can be neither proven nor refuted by the scientific method. Hence, their power has an enduring critique. And I put in the side notes that paragraph is an anti-Disney narrative. What Disney leaves out, the world's tales fall short to ultimate fulfillment and happiness. Only with the deeper longings can we find our true grounding. Um, and, and
Yeah.
and I randomly, I don't know if it was, I don't know if it was in relation to something I was watching for Subversive Orthodoxy or what, but somebody, oh, I think it was just a general critique of the new Snow White.
No, white movie.
Maybe it was something you sent me. I can't remember what it was, but something was saying that the original Snow White came from Grimm's fairy tales,
That's right.
and it had a lot of depth to it. It had spiritual depth to it, and it had grit. And then it
Hmm.
was reduced to a woman who needed to get kissed by a prince in order to,
Yeah.
it got super reduced into this like one dimensional, no conflict, no, not really conflict,
Yes.
just a villain that does, tries to prevent love or something.
Yes.
But it seems that they were critiquing Disney in general,
Hmm.
saying that they strip fairy tales and myths from their essential truth,
Hmm.
which is the opposite. It's the exact work that Goethe is doing in Faust, is not stripping it of its grit. And
Yeah.
that's the same as the storm and stress movement was to say, we're not going to sugarcoat life. Let's actually face it.
Yeah. Well,
Let's let's let,
that analogy is great.
let's
Great.
put aside rainbows and unicorns
Yeah.
and actually look at this person who committed suicide,
Yeah. 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 And that it was not something that rarely or never happened in the human condition. This is interesting. I'm gonna go a little bit of a tangent here. It reminds me. I think I told you I watched some of the YouTube analyses of book reviews of Faust,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, most, I think all of them, most of them, the ones I saw, um, were disappointed in this Faust, um, especially they couldn't read part two at all, and they were really disappointed at the Christian dimension of the end of Faust, where there was uh, salvation of
Grace and redemption.
grace and redemption as being kind of a cop out Christian sort of easy answer to a difficult problem. And having not read part two, which most of, or if they even read part two, they just said it was unreadable because part two is where all the heavy lifting comes in as to how you reconcile this dark uh, reality of evil with a divine creation is played out. And either that logic was too difficult, or it required such a different sensibility than our sensibility that they couldn't quite get what was really happening at the end, and so just dismissed it. And it kind of reminded me of like Dante's Divine Comedy. Everybody reads the Inferno, but nobody reads the Purgatorio or the uh, Paradiso sections, because
Mm-hmm.
that's where the religious sensibility kicks in terms of its relationship to all of the evil that is described in the Inferno.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with Faust. It's like everybody's okay as long as Faust is committing his sort of horrendous crimes with
And hanging out with the devil.
hanging out with the devil. that all makes kind of punky sense. But when the wheel starts to turn and Faust realizes that the devil doesn't have all the answers, that their interest begins to fade a little, that it's moving in a different direction. And then since part two is the reconciliation of Faust and the redemption of Mephistopheles, which is something that is almost incomprehensible in a modern setting. Um, they kind of lose attention or lose focus and say there's nothing happening, rather than really feel challenged by part two, which wasn't published in Goethe's lifetime. It was only after his death that part two was published. So that there's a at the beginning of Dante's Inferno, there's you probably remember there's uh, a message written over the entrance to the Inferno or hell. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. You're familiar with that?
I thought that was from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I think they made it a little less extreme. But anyway, they didn't have the whole um, printing. It's abandon all hope, ye who enter here, and then underneath it, it says, "I too was created by eternal love."
Mm,
Now that's the kicker.
yeah,
I can get abandon all hope, ye who enter here, but I too was created by eternal love. I mean,
yeah,
where is that coming from, right?
yeah.
And part two of Faust is when Mephistopheles is is redeemed. That
Mm.
that is the kicker in that, and because it follows from all the crazy stuff that happens in part two, but not logically. You know, it was sort of like you were saying in your summary. You know, it requires this ontological leap into a religious reality. It's almost kind of like when Kierkegaard talks about Abraham and Isaac. You know, the willingness to kill his son becomes a religious act that leads to his son's salvation. It just seems so wrong to a modern sensibility, and yet
Mm.
it's asking for a leap of faith uh, that is that Goethe is trying to sort of work out in part two of Faust.
If you can elevate out of your literature brain
Yeah.
and think like, why does someone care about Goethe today?
Okay.
What does he bring to the modern person that's not, necessarily focused on literature? Because I do think there's stuff there.
Okay.
Just like to hear it from you. Outside of
Okay.
literature, what do you think it is? What is his contribution?
Well, his contribution is a psychological appropriation of Christianity and Enlightenment, the complex conversation between Christianity and the Enlightenment, between the secular worship of power and knowledge versus the interior desire for God and uh, love and a larger connection to the universe, to nature and creation and to other people that is not mediated by knowledge and power. And so the
So he sort of through literature, he kind of stepped in and grabbed the two and held them together rather than letting them split apart. Similar to Blake.
exactly, yeah, it's like this is what Eliot called the disassociation of sensibility. The inner life and the outer life are separated now, and we worship the outer life. and the inner life is ruled by whim and advertising and manipulations. Um,
Who said
and
that?
I said that.
Oh, I thought you were just quoting someone.
Yeah, no. Um, and so the the literature that tried to bridge that gap, I mean, it already existed in Don Quixote. There was a sense where you could go back and find at the beginning of modernity stories about trying to bridge the gap between the inner and outer worlds that were now every generation has a different outer world, but it has the same inner world, the inner world of longing for meaning and love and significance. But the rules of the game that they were taught when they were 10 aren't in operation by the time they're 16 or 18, or even by the time they're 21.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these coming of age stories that in our pop culture are about the first time you had sex, rather than the real coming of age story that Goethe told about how do you come to grips with a world that doesn't even acknowledge your inner life or your desire for the transcendent. That's the real question. That that coming of age is not just losing your virginity and getting your driver's license. That coming of age is where you're initiated into a culture that takes seriously your inner longings for significance, meaning, love, community,
Mm.
and that's the real coming of age story. And when in Werther, we're talking about coming of age in 1778, right? The
Yeah.
very beginning of a modern world. And those values are under attack by the old establishment that wasn't ready for the American Revolution or for the liberty for all, or people falling in love and not giving into arranged marriages. Um, and so that was so he represented sort of the youthful uh, coming of age, the alienated hip person Werther, who wanted to follow the dictates of his inner life and not that of the world that wasn't really run by what was happening now. It was run by what was happening 10 years before by the people that were arranging their own money and power and ownership of things, and even arranging marriages that that weren't true to what people were feeling. And so he tells that story and makes it a tragedy of sorts. Of a person that wanted to remain true to the inner life, but found it in impossible conflict with the world he was in. And that became a bestseller. And you could see how that was kind of like the first Rebel Without a Cause. Now,
Mm.
now with Faust, it's more midlife crisis. That I spent my whole life serving money and power and knowledge.
Well, yeah, he got to the height. I mean, people may not know anything about Faust. So
Yeah,
Faust tells a story. It's a two-part play,
right.
and
In the first part,
Faust is visited by a devil sort of character
yeah,
called Mephistopheles.
hmm,
And what I learned is, I haven't read it myself
yeah,
yet, but I learned he made a wager, and the wager's not what you typically would think.
hmm,
He's not saying like do this moral thing or immoral thing, or I will take your soul. He's saying, um, I will assist you on doing everything and anything you want to the point of total fulfillment. And the wager is like, if you actually ever get satisfied, then I get your soul or something. Is that right?
yeah, yes, that's right. That
So
uh,
he's exploring like constant striving for your whole life for
right,
knowledge and beauty and meaning.
right, and Faust takes the wager because he can't imagine being contented ever. That life is just constant unfolding of new desire after new desire after new desire. So why would I ever think that I would ever be contented or at peace? Uh, I think in the Faust, it's there's a line in it, a famous line where if you ever say the words, um, "I am contented, let this last forever," I get your soul.
Yeah.
And so Faust knows himself as well as he can that this is never going to happen for him. So it really isn't a deal with the devil in his mind. It's just sort of, well, the devil isn't as bad as people think, in the sense of he's going to just keep me striving. And that's all I ever really want to do is strive and have new desires. So, what's there to lose?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't have an experience of my soul yet, or what I think of as my soul is this striving part of me.
And even before he makes the wager, right? Is he already at the height of what's the word?
Uh,
Scholasticism?
Scholarship. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, he's at the height of his career. He's at
Before the wager, right?
before the wager. He is sort of a guy who spent his whole life seeking knowledge and power, and it hasn't really paid off the way he thought. So this is an important part of the story. So he decides that he's going to commit suicide because all of this power and knowledge, however much he's been able to obtain, doesn't strike him as satisfying or enough. And he's in this little dusty lab with Wagner, his lab assistant, and he never married. He never had family or anything. And so he decides he's going to kill himself. And then before he can do that, he's disturbed by music coming from the village. And it's described as Easter music because it's part of the Easter celebration.
Oh yeah. And it's
So,
Easter week right now.
and it's Easter week. And
Holy week.
and it's interesting. The Werder meets Latte on spring break, and Faust is pulled out of his suicide by the Easter music of the celebration in the village of Easter week. So he goes outside to see what's up, and he gets outside his normal mind that is preoccupied with power and money, and he has a beer with the local laborers, and he dances with a peasant girl, and he enters into ordinary life and discovers, this is probably what I've been missing, is actual life with human beings. And so he comes back to his lab and decides he's going to retranslate the Gospel of John so that it doesn't begin with, "In the beginning was the Word," but "In the beginning was the act."
Oh yeah.
So now he's on like a second phase of his life to enter into life. And what happens is,
Life is action rather than knowledge.
yes, life is action rather than knowledge, but it's sort of like, if he had been into action, he probably would have discovered that it's also knowledge. He probably, right. So it's sort of like whatever you're dealing with in your first half of your life, you you see through at middle age, and now you have to develop the other side of yourself, and that's a Goethean motif, is the the novel of development. It's like you go too far in one direction, and then life brings you up short, and then opens up the other side. So now he's going to enter into the other side, But what he doesn't realize is that a black poodle snuck in when he was coming back from the festival, the Easter festival, and that black poodle was Mephistopheles, or the devil, or a demon servant of the devil, had snuck into his lab, and so he finds the dog hiding behind the stove, and he uses one of his um, potions that he's developed in his lab, where he can make anybody tell the truth. It's a truth-telling potion. So he compels Mephistopheles to reveal.
Because Faust was a scholar and also an alchemist.
Yes, yes. And so he compels the dog to say who he is. So the dog transforms into Mephistopheles. And Mephistopheles says, and this relates to what we said about Dante's Inferno, with the sub title, I also was created by eternal love. Uh, Who are you? And Mephistopheles says, I am part of that force in the universe that always wells evil, but only produces good.
Hmm.
Now, that's another one of those religious leaps of faith. Like, what? That's sort of like the paradox of the fortunate fall, right? That Adam and Eve's sin in the garden uh, doomed us to a life of sin, but it also do, made it possible for us to be redeemed, which is
Yeah.
and also made possible grace in a world that was so filled of grace, nobody knew that that's what they were experiencing, right? So it made possible consciousness of grace, and it made necessary human development as opposed to human perpetual stagnation within a uh, Garden of Eden that was unaware of its own uh, beauty, truth, and justice. So it put humanity on the road for self-discovery and self-creation, or one could call it an a educational journey into um, fathoming the true nature of grace that was beyond simply the acquisition of power and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where part one ends, where um, Faust is able to get everything he wants, or everything he thinks he wants. So he gets his youth back. He gets to seduce Gretchen. He gets all the money he wants. He gets all the power he wants. He gets everything that he thinks he wanted. But then Gretchen ends up pregnant, killing her baby, then killing herself, and being condemned to hell. And he realizes that he didn't want that. He didn't want the collateral damage that came with having everything he wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
so he looks to Mephistopheles to sort of right the wrong. And Mephistopheles said, well, I didn't promise you happiness. I only promised you power and knowledge, which is what you said you wanted.
Hmm.
And if you ever get happiness, then I get your soul, because you never wanted happiness. You thought happiness was impossible. And now Gretchen is safely within my clutches in hell. And so, you know, are you responsible for that or not? And then Gretchen repents of her sins and is redeemed by God. So Mephistopheles
After her death?
before her death. So
Oh,
at when she dies, because she's, I don't know whether she actually commits suicide or whether she's executed, uh, but uh, right when she is trying to kill herself or dies, um, the devil, I don't know whether it's Mephistopheles or the actual devil, says, uh, "Now she's mine."
oh, it says
And
she was sentenced to be beheaded for infanticide.
okay, so right before she's beheaded, the devil says, "She's mine," and then God opens up the heavens and says, "No, she's forgiven." Now, this divine intervention is something that modern readers find cheesy, but they haven't read part two and they don't know how grace operates in the Goethean story. Um, he's not really offering a cheap grace at the end of Gretchen's life. He's putting it into a cosmic context that Faust himself does not yet understand.
Mm.
So Faust goes back to his orgy at the Walpurgisburg party uh, with mixed emotions because this was what he said he wanted.
Yeah.
And yet, he didn't realize that uh, Gretchen would pay the price. But did Gretchen pay the price, or was she really? It sounds as if God saved her. Why would he save her? Uh, it doesn't quite make sense to me. I've made my wager, so I have to live with it. So part two is the living through of the consequences of that wager on on a spiritual plane, because it's more of it's not as realistic a story of a person who is has sold his soul to the devil and now is seeing the consequences. Um, it's more of he's he enters into the spiritual world of Mephistopheles, which is this imaginative world where he can go and do anything he wants. And so he decides that he's going to go back and uh, make love to Helen of Troy, and and have all of the kingdoms of the world, as well as the love of the most beautiful woman in history. And so it plays out as this kind of dream visionary fantasy in which the a lot of the internal spiritual and psychological steps um, after the fact of having seen the consequences of your fulfilling your desires on other people, or what they are on other people, become reality for him, and what it takes for him to turn around and give his soul to God at the end. And
Mm.
so that's the more probably that's the Purgatoria and Paradisio sections of Faust that, like most people who read um, the Divine Comedy, don't read because they think they already know that story, but it's not the story they think they know. And
Yeah, obviously Goethe is using his imagination big time.
oh yeah, yeah,
This is not your normal Bible story.
right, right, right. And it's a kind of a dream scenario. It's kind of
Well,
like uh,
I would have I think in my rigid evangelical mindset, I would have been like, oh, this is just weird, and this is just, maybe
It's
even
not. No, go ahead.
borderline demonic and not orthodox at all. But what I think a guy like Goethe or Blake are doing is actually exploring, for one thing,
Hmm.
exploring. They're
Yes,
thinking out loud through their literature. What I've learned from about Faust, it sounds like almost like Goethe's imaginary autobiography of exploring his own mind and desires.
exactly. I agree totally, totally.
And so
And
therefore, like, and you're saying that he kind of created that genre of having what do you call it, where you're writing about life development?
active imagination. Jung
Yeah,
called it
but the build on Roman or whatever.
Bildungsroman.
Yeah, that
Yeah, the life of
did.
the story of spiritual development.
So did Goethe put this brick down, and then is that what or he molded this brick called that, and then did he basically inspire a guy like Dostoevsky to then take that and build it with like 10 bricks and tell the story of a whole family?
Yes, yes, I think that that's exactly what happens.
So Dostoevsky was influenced, you would think, or
Oh
obviously,
yes,
or not
yes.
obviously.
Well, I think he even mentions Goethe at some point. But the I'm sure there's cultural differences because the Russians and the Germans are not known for their familiarity or their love of each other's culture. Although Goethe's Faust became an opera and made its way to Russia, and Russians love opera, and so the story was not lost on him. But what when we get to Dostoevsky, yeah, the parallels will be interesting because Dostoevsky takes literary realism, which is that idea of telling the truth about social and psychological experience as well as spiritual aspirations, and brings them together in his novels, so that you have this novel of development um, that tries to describe the redemption of some pretty dark characters.
Uh-huh.
And usually what happens is he doesn't succeed. And so for the first, I would say the like Crime and Punishment and The Idiot and The Demons,
Or
uh,
possessed, you mean?
the Possessed, he tried to show like the redemption of a terrorist or the redemption of in The Idiot, a redemption of a sort of a, uh, a person that was not really a person who was like a perfect Christian from his idea of a perfect Christian, and not a real redeemed Christian, because he couldn't imagine how that person would become a real Christian.
Are you talking about the idiot?
Yeah, The Idiot.
That's what the idiot's about?
Yeah, it's about
That's cool.
yeah. So all of his books, they like in crime. Let's take Crime and Punishment. It's a good example. Um,
Wait, I have a quote right now. Or not a
okay.
quote, but like a comment on that I found
Yeah.
which is interesting because we're going to be talking about Dostoevsky at some
Yeah.
point. There'll be an
Yeah.
episode of just him, but it
Yeah.
says here's how the Dostoevsky and Goethe relate.
Mm.
It says for Dostoevsky, the works of Goethe, Werther, and Faust were simply proofs of the wrong way the West had taken.
Mhm.
Dostoevsky would use Goethe's depravity of characters to create a Faustian context for his novella The Possessed, including that of character description, which also relates to literary time. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Right. And that's world literature. Right.
Yeah.
The Russian takes from the German, but improves it from his point of view.
Uh-huh.
But Dostoevsky, and we'll just go here because I think it's important for subversive orthodoxy. Um, Dostoevsky is kind of like Beethoven in a way, where he had a larger vision of the kind of music you wanted to make, or the kind of uh, novels he wanted to write. Right,
Mm-hmm.
the redemption of a would-be terrorist, or the example of a perfect Christian, or the one book he never lived long enough to write was the life uh, of a sinner. I think it was Life of a Redeemed Sinner or something like that, about himself, actually. Well, they were all kind of about himself. And he never felt that he really nailed it. They were kind of like unfinished masterpieces, or partial masterpieces, where people, it would be great if Raskolnikov actually, found redemption at the end of Crime and Punishment. And there is a kind of a uh, redemption at the end, but Dostoevsky didn't think he ever really nailed it, that it wasn't realistic enough, that it didn't seem like that would really happen.
Mm.
And so, by his own standards, these were like they say about Shakespeare's plays. They start great and the characters are wonderful, but then he doesn't know how to end them, so he just has everybody get killed off, or
Did
or he has a
they
happy
say that
ending.
about Shakespeare?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
I'm
So
not I'm not that well read.
yeah, so what's happening with Dostoevsky is, it's a lifelong progression, and then he writes the Brothers Karamazov, and he's got the three different brothers, and one brother is going to exemplify the reconciliation of an ordinary person to God in light of the psychology of the underground, which governs human striving, Faustian striving, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he and what we have as Brothers Karamazov, which is his last novel, is what he considers his masterpiece, that brought it that that brought it together. That finally did what he had always wanted to do, is get all the pieces in place. The contrast between the person who is too much in his head versus the person who's too much in his sexual passions versus the person who is trying to reconcile himself with God and succeeds. And that's part one. And part two, he never lived to write, which was going to be about the same brothers 20 years later, because they're
Hmm.
in their 20s in Brothers Karamazov. But Brothers Karamazov was going to have part two, in which he showed them 20 years down the line. And that's kind of similar to Goethe. You start with Sorrows of Young Werther, 20s, and then you end in the midlife crisis of Faust, and probably in his 40s or 50s. And there's that same thing going on in with Dostoevsky. But the great thing about Brothers Karamazov Part One is there are older characters in Part One that have navigated that midlife crisis. So you
Mm-hmm.
really don't really need Part Two, because you kind of have it all in Part One,
Yeah.
and that'll be fun to look at. But the fact that like Goethe, you're writing that novels are not like clever stories about guys who tried to make it in business and failed, or fell in love or something. They're really about how you reconcile the inner life to the outer life. And every generation needs its novelists, from Goethe's point of view, to talk about the new world you're navigating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and so this is kind of in Werther. Werther's sort of navigating what it would be like to come of age in 1778, a new world that's moving toward democracy, but hasn't caught up to itself yet, which is every generation, right? You're coming of age in a world that's already obsolete, and you were kind of trained for the obsolete world, but there's a new world on the horizon. How do you navigate that? Well, you can't just navigate that in a quest for power and knowledge, or you're going to end up uh,
On obsolete knowledge.
an obsolete little guy in his, you know, lab without any connection to real life.
That's so relevant now because I feel like the coming of age from 10 years to 10 years now is way more rapidly accelerating
Oh
with
yeah, 2 years to two
social
years.
media and
Yes.
social media, digital media, AI and all that.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah. It's
just from my age, I'm in my 40s
mm-hmm,
to a 20-year-old right now, my son's 18.
mm-hmm,
Our worlds are completely different
yeah,
in how they're paced and how people relate.
yeah.
So to write something now, or just not even just for literature, but just for the sake of understanding your culture now with 10-year iterations is insane compared to their generations was, probably things were changing a lot over 50 years.
That's right.
And now
Yeah,
things are changing a lot over 2 to 5 years.
yeah. That's right.
It's
And
pretty, I don't know what to do with that.
well,
Or how Goethe speaks into that.
the good news is the inner life and the is not isn't really changed.
That's
There's
that's
still
that's that's
there
the thing.
yeah, there's still the desire for meaning, love, connection, community, God. All those transcendent desires are as fresh with every generation. It's just that they meet up with different sources of resistance or misinterpretations, or they themselves have it harder to understand themselves if they don't have a writer or a spiritual director or somebody that can mirror for them um, the the spiritual world that they want to bring. Um,
Mm, yeah.
one of the writers that is like kind of a contemporary Goethe in terms of writing Bildungsromans was Hermann Hesse, who won the Nobel Prize in 1927, I think. So he's, and he had a resurgence in the 60s where everybody was reading Hesse novels, and all those novels were novels of development that were about a young idealistic character and the social forces allied against him that were really trying to direct him toward knowledge and power, not truth and faith. And so they were all sort of like Siddhartha, his famous um, story about the Bildungsroman of the Buddha. Tries to divide the Buddha's development into sort of universal stages of how you how you transform from a seeker to a finder, from someone who is looking for the truth in a world that doesn't seem to provide it, to someone who sees the truth at a more transcendent level. And in one of the frontispieces of one of the Hesse's novels is the little quote from Hess, and it's uh, I only tried to live in accordance with the promptings of my own heart. Why was that so difficult? And that's classic Goethe, right?
Could you say that again?
I only tried to live according to the promptings of my own heart. Why was that so difficult?
Huh.
And
That's
so
the
the stories are about why it's hard to live according to the promptings of your own heart. And in The Sorrows of Young Werther, it's sort of like, well, because you have this transcendent idealism that doesn't fit your compromised world. And that doesn't make you defective, but that does make you unrealistic, right? Basically, and the after Werther came out and became really popular, and everybody was dressing like Werther, but also a lot of it caused a lot of suicides actually of young people copying Werther, and uh, Goethe.
What do you make of that?
Well, Goethe wrote later about that, and he said, I thought that for me, Goethe was the person I had to get rid of. The inner, or Werther was the part of me, the young idealistic romantic that I had to get rid of so that I could get on with the serious work of writing Faust. And so, although I don't think he mentions Faust, but that's sort of what ended up being was that he had to get he had to mature out of that youthful rebellion, that rebel without a cause, into a adult with a purpose. And he couldn't do that until he got all those feelings and all those confusions and anger and feeling of displacement and resentment at the world that made it impossible for him to have the woman that he loved out on the page. And then once for him, he got it out on the page, it was kind of cathartic. But it didn't turn out to be cathartic for a lot of the young people that read him. And that caused him a lot of, actually, it didn't cause him as much pain and self doubt as it would have caused me or you, probably. But he was enough of an aristocrat to say, well, gee, I'm not responsible for the fact that people don't know how to read novels. They're not that novel is not a model on how to live. It's a warning on how not to live. And so that's why
He just attributed it to people's stupidity.
yeah, ignorance. Uh, that's why Hesse puts a little preface to his Bildungsroman. I only tried to live in accordance with my own heart. Why was that so difficult? Telling you what the novel's going to be about. It's going to be about this struggle with being true to your heart in an alien environment or a world that's so rapidly changing it's hard to find your context and your place in it, and that this isn't your fault and it isn't something that you should beat yourself up over, but something that should invite you to a more transcendent faith in an order that transcends this world, and how you can kind of intuit that or see it in operation. That's kind of how Faust Part One and Part Two work. But if you just read Part One, you only get half the story, and if you just read the demons or Crime and Punishment, you sort of get a very powerful critique of human psychology, but you don't get Dostoevsky's sort of mature spiritual response
Like
to
redemptive vision.
the redemptive vision as strongly or as persuasively as he thought he did in the Brothers Karamazov.
Do you think Goethe was preaching at the end of Faust, or do you think he didn't know how else to take it because that was his worldview?
Well, that's a really good question because I think he was
I think he was proclaiming something.
I think he was well, put it this way. if part one is a kind of Greek tragedy about the modern myth of the pursuit of power and knowledge as the ultimate end of human existence.
Which he
And
bankrupts in part one.
yes, it bankrupts in part one. In part two, he offers sort of like the alternative religious perspective in a kind of I'll put it this way. If part one is like a Greek tragedy, part two is more like a new genre of fantasy and dream scenario, epic redemption that's taking place inside his psyche and soul, rather than out in the world of power and knowledge. It's sort of
A
like
psychedelic redemptive
a
fantasy.
psychedelic, yeah, psychedelic redemption.
That as a category, that would be a whole new thing.
Yeah,
Psychedelic redemptive fantasy.
yeah. Before 1968, well before 1968.
And that concludes this episode. I think there may be something in here for all of you, each of you, whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or somewhere in between on your own deconstruction journey. We're going to be exploring what it means to live a life of deep meaning in a world that often feels fragmented and nihilistic. And this revelatory faith doesn't seem to come to us from the expected places. The prophetic voice doesn't seem to come from the pulpits or the seminaries. It's breaking through in novels, poetry, activism, art, and the unexpected corners of culture. We hope you'll join us on this ongoing conversation. Until then, thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. If you found this meaningful, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with anyone who might resonate with this conversation. Adios. This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchasti.
I want to jump off a cliff without a parachute like I'm high on cannabis and skip through fields naked like I wonder if I could drift or if I could drift through it. Dancing through moonlight under nighttime skies, forgetting the world's lies, meanwhile I'm fine. Looking through a stained glass oceanic scene. Say hi to human beings with a smile unseen. Grabbing wildflowers as I slide down hills after a rain, after some